I'd like to invite up a group of students who recently returned from Israel. Shana Holit, Maya Gatanyo, Shirel Kalumre, Carly Waldman, and Josh Nuttall. Thanks to your financial support over the year, our community has been able to send thousands of young teenagers and young adults to Israel on a variety of programs. And today we are lucky that several of these students who just returned have a chance to just give us an observation or two about their experience. Shana, where are you? You're over here? Shana, so, Shana, this was your first time in Israel, and fate had it that you were there to experience every day of this operation. You got back yesterday?
Yes.
Okay, so you were there for the funeral of Gilad and Naftali and Eyal, and you had to rush the shelter several times. Tell us a little bit, how'd you cope? I mean, this was your first trip to Israel.
So the very first time we went into a shelter, we were actually at high school in Israel, which is where we were staying most of the time. It was like our home base. It's in a city called Hod HaSharon outside of Tel Aviv. And we had known that there was supposed to be a drill that evening at 10 o'clock, and the siren went off at 10 o'clock. So some of us thought it was a drill, but a few people said, no, if it was a drill, the siren wouldn't have gone off. This is real. We went down into the shelter, and everyone was extremely calm, and we asked our counselor, is this a drill? And she said, no, it's not a drill. But interestingly enough, and this is very difficult to explain to people back in the States, I felt safer in Israel than I do here, which is really difficult to explain. But I think it's because here there are more domestic crimes. Whereas in Israel, I feel like everyone has your back and the whole community is watching out for each other. And even though there are rockets firing, everyone cares so much about one another that you feel safer. And thanks to the IDF and the soldiers who are taking care of us, we don't feel any threat personally to our own safety. We knew that the school would take care of us, and we knew that the IDF would take care of us.
Thank you. Wow. So Mai has a very different background. You're Israeli, kind of engaged in Israeli politics and advocacy. You're part of the Rose Project's Jewish Campus Leadership Initiative. And she's also the founder of the Pro-Israel group at Chapman University, by the way. And tell us a little bit, you were on Birthright.
Yes.
How was it?
Birthright was an incredible experience. For me, it was a little bit different than for most students because I come from an Israeli background. I was in Shevet Tapuz, the Israeli Scouts of Orange County. I grew up in a home where we spoke Hebrew and English. So Israel has always been deeply ingrained in my blood and has always been something I've cared about deeply. So Birthright was different for me, and it was different because I was able to watch 40 other trip participants fall in love with the same nation that stole my heart so many years ago. In Birthright, I found not only 40 new friends on bus 1190, but 40 new partners in supporting Israel and partners in strengthening the Jewish community. A few days after Birthright, I traveled to the south, to Eilat with my family. In Eilat, I heard my first siren. It was terrifying. It was a mix of adrenaline, a mix of fear. But the scariest part, in the end, wasn't the siren. It was how people reacted. Amongst the people in the hotel were people from Ashkelon and Ashdod, people for whom rockets are a daily reality, people for whom they hear the rockets every single day. And these people were unfazed by the rockets. They were completely unfazed by it. And that to me was both heartbreaking and incredibly beautiful. It was beautiful that they were so resilient, but heartbreaking that they had to endure this reality, because terror should never be a reality in anyone's life. Overall, this trip definitely strengthened my connection to Israel, and despite the rockets, despite the war, I feel even more connected to my homeland than I ever have.
Thank you. Shira Al-Kalumre was on the BBYO trip in Orange County. I had an opportunity to check up on her a little bit, even spoke to your mom once or twice, along with 100 other mothers over the last few weeks. So, Shira, you had some pretty exciting experiences after we suggested that your group go to Eilat. Do you want to tell us what happened?
While we were in Eilat, in the middle of the night, there were sirens that went off, and I slept through the sirens, but the noise of all the other people on our trip banging on our door, we all ran to the lobby, and I was half asleep and had no idea what was going on, but they had told us that a missile had hit fairly close to our hotel, and it hit the ground, and there were families outside crying and, you know, calling each other, and that really, it taught me that this is a daily reality for Israelis, and it really affected me to see not only Israel from America's point of view, but Israel from Israel's point of view, and to be there like a citizen, it affected me. And one day we went to the Syrian border, and you could actually hear the bombs going off in Syria during their civil war, and you could hear the noise of terror, and I just started crying. It affected me so much. But we also went to Mount Herzl, the memorial site for IDF soldiers, and I had an opportunity to speak to a mother and father of a deceased soldier, and they told me about the resilience of their child and the bravery of the soldiers. And it just shows you how much these kids put into the IDF and into their country because of how much they care. And at the end of our trip, we were able to go to Jerusalem a second time. And it was the second time we went to the Kotel. And it was the day after Shabbat, the day after revolt went over at the Kotel, so we weren't able to go during Shabbat, but we went the next day. And it meant a lot more to me than the first time we visited it, because the first time we saw it, it was a holy place, and you know, you hear all about the Kotel and the Western Wall. And the second time was a lot more emotional, because you know that it's the last wall, the last part of the Holy Temple that was left up, and it's all that's left of the Jewish people from the Holy Temple, and that just shows no matter what happens to the Jewish people, they'll always stand strong, always stand united, and Hamas can't keep us down.
Thanks. Carly?
Hi.
Carly Waldman was on our Next Gen Birthright trip. That's a birthright trip for slightly older young adults that we've been very excited about. So how was your summer?
My summer or my trip?
How was your summer?
You're right. The trip, as everyone has expressed, is incredibly life-changing, especially to be on a trip with such a wide variety of Jewish young adults with very different backgrounds in their heritage and their experience with Judaism. But what was most meaningful, I think, was being able to experience the full 10 days with 6 Israeli soldiers and students who participated in the trip in the exact same way that every other American participant did. It really gave me friends in Israel, friends with this nationalism and pride in their homeland and in their Jewish heritage, which I had never really experienced before or understood until I put myself in their shoes and was able to relate to people just like me, just living in a different country. So now that all of these men and women that I'm close to are going off into the Army, and our tour guide actually, who is in the reserves and has a young child, was asked and called out as well. It gives me a completely different appreciation for the country and the military. I feel like as an American Jew, I have a stronger relationship and pride in the Israeli military than even our own military here in America. And it's weird to think of it like that, because I definitely have a strong identity in both my American identity and my Jewish identity. So it's an interesting dichotomy like that, but I think it comes from the fact that the minute I got off that plane,
it's love at first sight, and that sounds so cliche, but there's this really oxymoronic feeling you get when you get there. You're in a totally foreign place that you've never seen before, but you're completely comfortable. I felt like I was completely myself because of the people and the vibrancy of the community, no matter the situation.
Thank you. Josh Nuttall. Josh, you're here. So Josh was on the infamous TVT Poland-Israel trip, and you had quite the experience at Majdanek and Auschwitz and then to Israel.
Yeah. So we also visited the Gaza border, which was special for us, and at the time, I didn't really think that visiting the Gaza border was all that important. For example, while there, my grade and I ran into a bomb shelter for practice. But we all couldn't stop laughing as we went into the shelter because we took it as a big joke. But looking back at it now, I realize why our school took us there and why it was such an important experience. We were there to see that Gaza and Israel are literally right next to each other. And the fighting that's going on is not far away, but rather it is right in the midst of Israeli towns and cities. Now I know that bomb shelters are a part of Israeli life, for the fighting takes place right on Israeli doorsteps. I can only imagine the people of that village, right next to that Gaza border, running into that shelter, probably crammed, worried, and plugging their ears from loud sirens. It isn't a joke. Having come from Poland, like you said, and having seen the hatred that some people can have for Jews, I now know more than ever how important it is for us to stand together. You really need to see the past and where we have come from and what we have survived in order to understand the urgency of the present. In addition, remembering our past keeps us strongly banded together, and only when we are united can we fight the people that want to destroy us. And that applies both to the Middle East and in Europe, where anti-Semitism is at a level that we haven't seen in many years. For that matter, it applies to all Jews all around the world, even here in Orange County. We have an obligation to stand together with Israel, with the Israeli soldiers, and with the Jewish people. We are one unit. We are in this together.
Thank you, Josh. As we prepare to conclude, I'd like to invite Amy Robinson and Missy Jane back up to the stage. And while we do that, I would just like to thank all of our community partners who are here this evening and their lay people and professionals, as well as the 25 Jewish organizations and 37 congregations in Orange County that are represented here tonight. That's quite the accomplishment. I'd also like to let you know that we know of 13 soldiers from Orange County that are currently serving in the IDF, some of them in Gaza. And Jacqueline Singer, if you are here, are you here? Jacqueline, there she is. Jacqueline returned yesterday following 2 years of service. She's a TVT graduate from 2008. 2012 San Diego State graduate. She served her full 2 years in the Israel Defense Forces. Thank you very, very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the singing of our national anthems.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets regular, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was see